Jungkook stepped onto the stage with a quiet, unshakable grace. The crowd erupted, cheers, camera flashes, and fan chants thundered through the massive auditorium. But he barely acknowledged it, offering just a humble nod and a soft smile. Across from him, seated beneath harsh stage lights in a sleek, minimalist chair, was Mark Zuckerberg, the architect of Meta, the face of the metaverse revolution, and the man who saw the future in lines of code, not chords of melody. This wasn't just an interview. It was a confrontation, a philosophical collision between two worlds, one human, one hyper-optimized. The cameras were rolling. Millions were watching. Zuckerberg leaned forward, his posture rigid but confident, fingers lightly tapping the chair's armrest. Jungkook, he began with a smirk. I've got to admit, I was surprised you accepted. You know this isn't a concert. It's about the future. And AI is the future. Your industry, just curated nostalgia. The audience chuckled, some nervously, others smugly. But Jungkook didn't flinch. He adjusted his mic pack, exhaled gently, and said, "Nostalgia reminds us what it means to be human. Mark, can AI do that?" A few murmurs rippled through the room. Zuckerberg's smirk flickered, but only for a second. He waved a hand dismissively. "Come on," he scoffed. "Romanticize it all you want, but AI's writing songs, generating virtual idols, even staging live holographic concerts. In 5 years, the industry won't need you. Machines don't need breaks, don't get sick, don't age. You're what, 26 now? You really think fans will pick you over a flawless AI version of yourself?" A gasp from the crowd. It was a cold blow. Calculated. Classic Zuckerberg. The camera zoomed in on Jungkook's face. No flinch. No twitch. Just a slow, knowing smile. He leaned in slightly. "Mark," he said gently, "have you ever heard someone sing at a funeral?" Zuckerberg blinked, caught off guard. "Sure, you can play a recording. You can recreate the perfect pitch, the flawless tone. But can you simulate the tremble in their voice? The tears barely held back? The breath between notes that means more than the melody itself?" The audience held its breath. Zuckerberg opened his mouth, then shut it again. "There's something about being there," Jungkook continued, "about feeling the moment, truly feeling it, that no AI can replicate. That's what makes music, stories, connection, irreplaceable." Applause erupted. A surge of energy rolled through the room. Zuckerberg's face was unreadable now, but his fingers were clenched slightly. He leaned back, then forward again, voice sharper. "You're missing the point," he said. "This isn't about concerts. It's about efficiency, about evolution, about survival. Humans are slow. They mess up. They get tired, emotional. AI doesn't. And in the end, it's not about what we want, it's about what we need." Jungkook tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, with perfect stillness, he asked, "Is intelligence measured by how well something replaces us, or by how well it helps us?" The room froze. Mark's jaw twitched. He tried to respond, but nothing came. "The real question," Jungkook continued, his voice steady and low, "isn't can AI replace us, it's should it." The crowd roared. No one expected a K-pop star to drop a philosophical gauntlet, but he just did. And for the first time that evening, Mark Zuckerberg had no reply. Jungkook turned back to the crowd, nodding gently as if to let them absorb everything that had just happened. The applause swelled, thunderous, heartfelt, and in that moment, it became clear. This debate wasn't just about artificial intelligence anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about the future of humanity. The cheers echoed through the auditorium, but Mark Zuckerberg remained still. He stared at Jungkook, frozen, as if searching for a way to pull the conversation back under control. His hands were clasped tightly, the usual calculated confidence in his posture now replaced by something more rigid, more uncertain. The cameras zoomed in, capturing a fleeting flicker of doubt on his face. He knew he couldn't afford to look weak. Not here, not now, not in front of millions watching live. But Jungkook had done something no one else had managed to do. He had shifted the power dynamic. What began as a discussion about AI and entertainment had become something Zuckerberg hadn't anticipated. A confrontation over values, over identity, over what it means to feel. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, calm and composed, as if he hadn't just dismantled one of the most powerful tech figures in the world. He let the silence linger, his stillness speaking louder than any words. The audience wasn't just witnessing a debate anymore. They were witnessing a revelation. Zuckerberg exhaled sharply, adjusting in his seat before forcing a dry chuckle. "All right, Jungkook," he said, voice regaining some of its calculated edge. "You talk a lot about what AI shouldn't replace, but let's talk about reality. Do you know what's happening in the industry right now? AI is already writing lyrics, generating beats, even performing entire concerts in virtual reality. The companies don't care about nostalgia. They care about numbers. AI is faster, cheaper, and, let's be honest, better. So tell me, what's stopping a label from generating a younger, digital version of you? Do you really think fans will still care whether it's the real Jungkook or not?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was bold, aggressive, and cold, but Zuckerberg looked pleased with himself. This was his turning point, his calculated strike at Jungkook's very relevance. But Jungkook didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "That's a fair question, Mark," he said evenly. "But let me ask you something. If AI can create a younger, better version of me, why hasn't it?" The crowd exploded in applause. Zuckerberg blinked, thrown for just a moment. Jungkook leaned forward, voice soft but cutting. "You say AI can replace artists, but real artists are still signed. You say AI can write songs, but the ones people replay endlessly at night, the ones that live in their memories, are still written by human hands. Why? Because perfection isn't what makes us connect. Flaws do." He let that sink in. The greatest performances in history aren't remembered because they were technically flawless. They're remembered because they were real. The mood in the auditorium shifted once again. People weren't just listening, they were internalizing it. Zuckerberg looked visibly annoyed now. He wasn't used to being on the defensive, and Jungkook had backed him into a corner he didn't see coming. For the first time, Zuckerberg leaned forward with force. "So you're seriously saying AI will never be better than humans?" he snapped. "Look at chess. AI crushed every human grandmaster. Look at medicine. AI diagnoses illnesses faster than most doctors. And you expect me to believe the one thing AI won't dominate is pop music?" Jungkook didn't answer immediately. He let the tension breathe. He scanned the crowd, then turned calmly back to Zuckerberg. "I don't think AI will dominate," he said. "I think it will reveal what truly matters." Zuckerberg scoffed. "That's the kind of thing people say right before they get replaced." Jungkook chuckled, nodding slowly. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe AI will change everything. Maybe the industry will be filled with algorithms that predict what people want to hear before they even know it. Maybe I'll be replaced. Maybe human creativity will become a footnote in history." Zuckerberg smirked, sensing a win. But Jungkook wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Mark. "But if AI is so superior, if it can predict everything, then why do humans still surprise each other?" Zuckerberg's smirk faded. "Why do people fall in love when they least expect it? Why do they laugh at things they didn't see coming? Why do they cry at songs even when they already know how they end?" Jungkook let the silence settle. "Because we are unpredictable, and that's something no AI will ever understand." The audience froze, silent, locked into the moment. The live stream chat was exploding. People weren't just observing, they were taking sides. Zuckerberg sat stone-faced, jaw tight, mouth pressed into a line. He had lost this round, and he knew it. Still, he took a breath and forced a smile, clearly with effort. "All right, Jungkook," he said, voice lighter now, almost mocking. "That was poetic, I'll give you that. But let's talk about the real world. This industry isn't driven by emotion. It's driven by profit. AI doesn't need breaks. It doesn't demand royalties. It doesn't age. And when AI-generated music starts making more money than yours," he leaned in slightly, narrowing his eyes, "no one's going to care how real it feels." Jungkook's smile slowly faded. He took a breath, nodding gently, not in defeat but in acknowledgement. Mark's question had weight. Then, turning his gaze to the audience, Jungkook said softly, "That's not a question for me. That's a question for all of you." The camera panned across the crowd. People were exchanging glances, some nodding in thought, others clearly torn. Then Jungkook turned back to Zuckerberg, his voice calm and resolute. "Because at the end of the day, Mark, technology doesn't shape humanity. Humanity shapes technology." The room went completely still. Zuckerberg's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The man who built empires out of code, the architect of digital worlds, the billionaire who always had an answer, suddenly had none. Jungkook exhaled, thoughtful, his words now quieter, but more piercing than ever. I think the real question, he said, is not whether AI will replace us, it's whether we will allow it to. The audience erupted. An avalanche of cheers, applause, even a few tears. Zuckerberg sat frozen, eyes locked on Jungkook, as if trying to understand how the narrative had slipped from his control. The debate wasn't over, but something had undeniably shifted. He wasn't just debating Jungkook anymore. He was losing the room, and he felt it. The applause still echoed through the auditorium, but now there was something deeper underneath it, something silent but powerful. Jungkook hadn't just challenged Zuckerberg, he had reframed the entire conversation. This wasn't about AI anymore. It was about humanity, about what makes people irreplaceable. Zuckerberg's fingers tightened slightly on the armrests of his chair. The usual smirk had vanished, replaced by something more calculated, more uncertain. The cameras caught it, the brief flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't just debating a person anymore. He was up against a philosophy, a belief. He inhaled sharply, forcing a chuckle. "All right, Jungkook," he said, shaking his head with a weak grin, though his voice carried a noticeable edge of frustration. "You make a compelling argument, really you do. But let's get back to reality." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his tone dropping into something quieter, meant to sound intimate, but clearly performative. "You say AI can't replace humanity, that it can't replicate creativity. But let me tell you something, you don't need to replace something to make it irrelevant." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The energy shifted. Zuckerberg was shifting strategy. He wasn't trying to win the logic anymore. He was going for shock. He gestured toward the massive LED screen behind them, and with a flick of his hand, the display changed. The screen lit up with an image so uncanny, so precise, that the audience audibly gasped. There stood Jungkook, or rather, something that looked exactly like him. His stance, his expression, the way he blinked. Perfect digital clone, eerily lifelike. Zuckerberg leaned back smugly. "This," he said triumphantly, "is AI. And it doesn't need to replace you, Jungkook. It just needs to be good enough that people stop caring." A heavy silence settled over the auditorium. Some whispered, some simply stared. The replica on screen blinked again, raised a hand, and gave a pixel-perfect smile. It was flawless, but it was empty. Zuckerberg sat back, arms crossed, his smirk returning. "Tell me, Jungkook," he said slowly, savoring every word. "Can you honestly say that 10 years from now, a studio is still going to pay you millions when they can generate this in seconds?" The tension in the room was suffocating. The audience looked to Jungkook. Was this it? The moment Zuckerberg backed him into a corner? But Jungkook didn't even glance at the screen. He didn't blink. Instead, he smiled, not the polite stage smile, but a real one. Gentle, almost pitying. Then he looked directly at Zuckerberg. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said softly. Zuckerberg's smirk twitched. "Get what?" Jungkook finally glanced at the screen, his digital self, standing still, blinking with machine-like precision. "You created a copy," he said. "But where's the soul?" The words hit the room like a blade. The audience collectively exhaled. Some had been holding their breath without realizing it. Zuckerberg's fingers twitched. His composure was intact, but barely. There was something behind his eyes now, something unsettled. Jungkook leaned in just slightly, his voice nearly a whisper, but it carried. "That thing on the screen, it looks like me. It moves like me. But it isn't me. And you know how I know?" He placed a hand on his own chest. "Because I feel." The words hung in the air, unshakable. Zuckerberg scoffed, but it sounded hollow. "Feeling," he muttered, waving a hand. "That's just neurons firing. Chemicals in your brain. AI can simulate emotions. Eventually, people won't even notice the difference." Jungkook tilted his head, considering it. Then he turned to the audience. "Tell me something," he said, eyes scanning the crowd, locking in on one face at a time. "Have you ever cried during a song?" A soft murmur of agreement spread through the audience. "Have you ever laughed at a joke that wasn't even that funny, but it was told by someone you love?" More nods, smiles, sniffles. Jungkook smiled again. "And have you ever lost someone, really lost someone, and felt something inside you that no algorithm could ever explain? Silence. Then, from somewhere in the back, barely above a whisper, a single voice answered, "Yes," and it was enough. Zuckerberg's jaw clenched. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth still curled, like a man who knew this round was already over. "That's the difference, Mark," he said. "AI can replicate logic, can mimic expressions, can study behavior, but it will never understand loss. It will never treasure a memory. It will never be afraid of the unknown. It will never love." A slow wave of applause started in the back. Then it spread, row by row, like a rising tide of truth. Not noise, but conviction. Zuckerberg shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now. The AI version of Jungkook still stood frozen on the screen behind them, eerily perfect and unmistakably hollow. Jungkook gestured toward the screen. His voice was clear and steady. "You can create 1,000 versions of me," he said. "They can look better. They can sound better. They can mimic my moves, my voice, my smile. But they will never be me. And that's why they'll never replace me." The applause exploded, louder than before, this time not just in support, but in recognition of something everyone in the room had felt but couldn't name. Mark Zuckerberg sat still, fingers tapping lightly against his knee. He hated losing, but worse, he knew he was losing, and he was losing in front of the entire world. Desperate to reclaim momentum, he chuckled dryly and shook his head. "So what's your plan, Jungkook?" he said, forcing a smirk. "Are you going to fight AI? Try to stop progress? Pretend the world isn't changing?" Jungkook's expression shifted just slightly. He took a breath and said with quiet finality, "No, I'm going to guide it." The audience froze. Even Zuckerberg's smirk faltered. "What do you mean?" Mark asked quickly, the tension in his voice just barely masked. Jungkook exhaled, and then he dropped the bombshell. "I haven't been avoiding AI," he said. "I've been building it." Gasps filled the room. Zuckerberg's eyes widened. The live stream chat exploded into chaos. Jungkook let the moment hang, let the ripple of disbelief move through the crowd before continuing. "I've spent the last 5 years investing in AI, not to replace humans, but to help them, to protect art, to make sure creativity stays human. Because AI isn't the enemy. The danger comes from who controls it and how." Zuckerberg sat frozen. For the first time all night, he had nothing to say. The power had shifted completely, and he could feel it. The audience buzzed with murmurs of shock and admiration. It wasn't just a defense, it was a checkmate. Zuckerberg's smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, more analytical. He blinked rapidly, shifting in his seat as if trying to process what had just happened. The cameras caught it, the tension tightening his jaw, the subtle twitch of his fingers along the armrest. He wasn't debating a pop idol anymore. He was facing a real competitor, a visionary. He exhaled sharply through his nose, then forced a dry chuckle. "So let me get this straight," he said, voice still tight. "Jungkook, the global pop star, has been secretly developing AI? And I'm supposed to believe you understand it better than the engineers at Meta, Google, or OpenAI." He gestured vaguely to the audience, inviting them to laugh with him. "Come on. We both know what this is really about." Zuckerberg's voice dropped into something darker. "This isn't about AI. This is about fear. You're scared. You see the future coming and you're trying to slow it down, just like every other fading celebrity clinging to relevance." The crowd murmured. Some shifted uncomfortably. It was personal now. It was meant to sting. But Jungkook didn't blink. He exhaled softly, not in anger, but almost in disappointment. Then he looked at Zuckerberg with an expression that wasn't frustration. It was pity. "You know what's funny, Mark?" he said, his voice gentler now, more deliberate. "I actually agree with you." Zuckerberg raised an eyebrow. "Do you now?" "Yeah," Jungkook nodded. "You're right. This isn't just about AI. It's about something deeper. But you're wrong about the fear." He leaned forward, just a little, his gaze locking onto Zuckerberg's with precision. "You think I'm afraid of the future?" A pause. "Then tell me, Mark, why do you always sound like a man who's afraid of the present?" The room went dead silent. Zuckerberg blinked, visibly taken aback, as if the words had reached a place he didn't want touched. The audience gasped, not because Jungkook had shouted, but because of the precision, the emotional sharpness of the strike. Jungkook didn't give him time to recover. You talk about the future like it's an unstoppable wave, he continued, voice still calm, still grounded. Like humanity has no choice but to be swept away. Like we're passengers, not builders. He turned and gestured toward the crowd, toward the millions watching. But that's not true. We choose what kind of future we build. We shape it. AI isn't destiny. It's a tool. And the real question isn't what AI can do. It's who gets to decide how it's used. The audience murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. Phones lit up. Zuckerberg shifted in his chair, fingers tapping against the table. He was searching, grasping for footing. He inhaled deeply. All right, he said. Let's go with that. Let's say AI is a tool. But what happens when the people controlling that tool decide they don't need anyone else? What happens when companies realize they don't need artists or musicians or writers? He motioned toward Jungkook. Or even engineers anymore. Jungkook didn't hesitate. That's exactly why I'm involved, he said plainly. Because we're at a crossroads. We can either build AI that replaces us, or AI that empowers us. Zuckerberg laughed sharply, shaking his head. And what, you think you're going to stop it from taking jobs, from disrupting industries? Jungkook didn't flinch. I think we can decide which jobs it takes. The audience erupted in applause. Zuckerberg's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected that answer. He had expected fear, nostalgia, denial. What he got was vision. Mark had expected Jungkook to argue against AI the way so many celebrities did, like a nostalgic relic from another era, clinging to fading spotlights and analog dreams. But instead, Jungkook had done something Zuckerberg hadn't prepared for. He embraced the future, but on his own terms. The cameras zoomed in on Mark's face, capturing the tightening tension across his jaw. He wasn't just debating anymore, he was losing, and not in some quiet, technical sense. He was losing the room, the narrative, the momentum. Jungkook continued, his voice smooth and unwavering. The real danger isn't AI itself, he said. The real danger is who controls it. And right now, it's in the hands of people who see it only as a way to replace humanity, instead of helping it. He turned toward Zuckerberg, eyes locked. And that's the problem, Mark. Because the future shouldn't be decided by just one man. Mark tensed. The crowd felt it. This wasn't just a discussion anymore, it was a reckoning. Mark inhaled sharply, forcing out another dry chuckle. So what now? He asked, his voice a bit too tight. You're going to start competing with me? Launch your own AI company? What's it called? JK Neural Beats. He smirked, attempting to undercut him with humor. But Jungkook only smiled. I don't need to, he replied. He paused. The air went still. I already have. Silence, then absolute chaos. The crowd exploded. The live stream chat detonated in all caps. People couldn't type fast enough. Zuckerberg sat frozen, his eyes narrowing. Jungkook remained perfectly still. You've been building AI to replace people, Jungkook said. I've been building AI to support them. Zuckerberg flinched. That's impossible, he snapped, his voice suddenly low, almost like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. I would have heard about it. Jungkook shrugged. Maybe you were too busy trying to replace the world, to notice the ones trying to protect it. The room went wild. Zuckerberg said nothing. His jaw was locked. His fingers flexed against the armrest. For the first time in his career, Mark Zuckerberg had been outplayed. And he knew it. This wasn't just a loss. It was a shift. The kind of moment that would be clipped, analyzed, and watched millions of times. Zuckerberg, the man who branded himself as the architect of the digital future, sat silent. His usual bravado had evaporated. Across from him sat Jungkook, unshaken, unwavering, a presence too grounded to be rattled, too real to be replaced. The camera zoomed in again, catching Zuckerberg's eyes darting for an escape. But there wasn't one. The crowd had turned. They weren't clapping for intellect anymore. They weren't amused by arrogance. They were with Jungkook, and Mark felt it, deeply. He exhaled sharply, then leaned forward, lacing his fingers tightly. All right, Jungkook, he said, voice lower and more measured now. You've said a lot of poetic things tonight. And sure, you're good at making people feel something. But let's talk about something real: numbers. He tapped his fingers on the table, emphasizing the word. How much money have you actually put into AI development? It was a trap. Mark thought he had him. Too small a number, and Jungkook would look like a poser. Too big, and Mark could spin it as hypocrisy, a celebrity trying to play billionaire tech god. But Jungkook? He just smiled. The right amount, he said simply. The audience burst into laughter. Zuckerberg's smirk twitched. He hadn't expected that. Jungkook leaned in slightly, resting his hands on the table, still calm. That's the thing, Mark, he said. You think everything is measured in billions. Market shares, control. But some things, he shook his head, you can't put a price on. Mark scoffed. Oh, come on. That's a nice line. But let's be real. You think you can outspend me? Outbuild me? I run companies that push the boundaries of AI, robotics, neuroscience. You're sitting here debating me. Jungkook cut in, his voice light. The audience erupted again. Zuckerberg froze just for half a second. But the cameras caught it. That tiny pause. That crack in the foundation. Jungkook tilted his head. So tell me, Mark, he said with effortless control. If I'm so irrelevant, why do I have your attention? Boom. Zuckerberg exhaled sharply, shaking his head, but he was rattled now. He had underestimated Jungkook from the start. Expected someone who would crumble under logic, someone who would retreat behind ideals. But Jungkook wasn't crumbling. He was winning, and Zuckerberg knew it, so he changed tactics. If he couldn't win with reason, he'd win with spectacle. Fine, Zuckerberg said, forcing a grin. You want to talk about relevance? Let's settle it right now. He snapped his fingers. The massive LED screen behind them flickered, then transformed. The audience gasped. This time, it wasn't just a still image of Jungkook's AI clone. It was a fully AI-generated short film. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms as the scene played. Concert. Explosions of light. Flawless camera angles. A digital Jungkook, perfect in every way, sang, danced, emoted with eerie accuracy. Every note was on key. Every expression was calculated. The movements were fluid, elegant, sharp. It was breathtaking, but it was also soulless. This, Mark said, gesturing smugly toward the screen, was created in less than 24 hours. No actors, no dancers, no stage crew, no production team, just pure AI. The audience watched, transfixed and unnerved. And Jungkook? He didn't even look at the screen. Mark turned back to Jungkook, raising an eyebrow. Tell me, he said, gesturing toward the massive screen where the AI-generated short film had just finished. How do you compete with that? For the first time all night, Jungkook was silent. The audience was holding its breath. On the screen moments ago, a digital version of him had danced, spoken, and moved with such precision it was nearly flawless. Too perfect, too empty. And Mark knew it. He was counting on that spectacle to seal the moment. The film ended. The silence in the auditorium was thick. Mark leaned back, his smirk returning. So, Jungkook, he asked, tilting his head slightly, do you still think people will care whether it's really you up there? The crowd waited. Then Jungkook stood, slowly, calmly. He smiled, not for show, but like someone who had already won. Let me ask you something, Mark, he said, voice steady. Mark raised an eyebrow, curious. Jungkook gestured to the screen behind them. Do you think anyone in this room is going to remember that scene tomorrow? The crowd gasped. Mark blinked, caught off guard. What? I mean it, Jungkook continued. Do you think anyone's going to remember a single line your AI version of me just said? A single emotion it stirred? A single moment that felt real? Mark opened his mouth, but said nothing, because he knew the answer. Jungkook stepped forward, lowering his voice so the room leaned in. That's the difference, Mark. You keep trying to replace people, but people aren't just visuals. We're not just audio or movement. We're connection. He turned to the crowd. Movies don't make history because they're perfect. They make history because they're felt. The audience erupted. Jungkook nodded, then looked back at Mark. AI is a tool, powerful one. But the moment you think it can replace meaning, that's the moment you lose the soul of everything that matters. Mark sat stiffly in his chair. For the first time, he looked small, deflated. Jungkook turned to the audience. So here's my question for all of you, he said, voice filling the auditorium. Would you rather watch something flawless or something real? The chat exploded. The energy in the room flipped. Mark Zuckerberg, the unshakable billionaire, was now the one out of step. This wasn't about AI anymore. It was about legacy. Trying to recover, Mark forced a smirk. "That was cute," he said, his voice sharper now. "But let's stop pretending emotions pay the bills." He leaned in. "Let's talk numbers. AI-generated content already racks up millions of views. Studios are investing in fully AI-driven films because, newsflash, people want them. You can talk about real feeling all day, but money talks." A few in the audience nodded. Mark saw his opening. "People don't want slow, expensive, emotional visions," he said, gesturing to Jungkook. "They want fast, optimized, infinite content. They want entertainment, not philosophy. And Gen Z? Raised on TikToks and instant streams? They don't care about meaning. They want new." The room shifted. Then Jungkook let out a genuine laugh, deep and effortless, and it changed the room's air. Mark's smirk faded, just a little. Jungkook shook his head, still smiling. "That's funny," he said, "because I remember when people said movies would kill books, when they said TV would kill cinema, streaming would kill theaters, ebooks would kill print." He looked around the crowd. "And yet, here we are. Books are still here. Theaters are still here. Music, real music, is still here." Then, looking Mark straight in the eye, "Why do you think that is?" Mark rolled his eyes, scoffing. "Because old people are nostalgic, that's all. People cling to the past until they have no choice but to move on." Jungkook just smiled. He had him. No, he thought he did. "No," Jungkook said, his voice lowering just slightly. "It's because technology doesn't erase meaning. It just forces us to fight harder for it." The audience erupted again. Zuckerberg exhaled, his smirk tightening. Jungkook wasn't just arguing against AI. He was reframing the entire conversation. "So go ahead," Jungkook continued, gesturing toward Zuckerberg. "Make your AI-generated movies. Flood the internet with auto-created content. Overload every platform with artificial storytelling." He locked eyes with Zuckerberg. "Because in the end, do you know what's going to happen?" Zuckerberg didn't answer. Jungkook did. "People are going to get sick of it." The room fell quiet. Jungkook leaned in slightly. "People will always chase what feels real. You can distract them for a while. You can flood their feeds, drown them in algorithmic noise. But eventually," he spread his hands, "they'll crave something they can't predict. Something human." A wave of quiet understanding moved through the audience. Zuckerberg gripped the arms of his chair tighter. He could feel it. He was losing them again. Desperate now, Zuckerberg pushed back. "So what's your plan, Jungkook?" he asked, voice sharp. "Are you going to make movies by hand? Convince billion-dollar studios to abandon profit? Or are you just going to sit there and hope people become poets?" Jungkook exhaled slowly, his expression steady. Then he looked Zuckerberg straight in the eye. "My plan." He paused. "I already started." The crowd gasped. Zuckerberg froze. "I already started," Jungkook repeated, his voice deadly calm. "While you were trying to replace people, I was giving them back their power. While you were building AI to generate content, I was building AI to protect creativity." Zuckerberg's face dropped, because now he realized Jungkook wasn't bluffing. The audience leaned in. Phones were raised. The chat exploded. Zuckerberg forced a weak smirk. "What are you saying, Jungkook?" Jungkook leaned back, completely at ease now. "I'm saying that for the last 5 years, I've been funding the future of entertainment. Not one that replaces humans, but one that gives them back control." Zuckerberg swallowed hard. Jungkook continued. "Musicians, writers, actors, artists, all the people your AI is threatening to erase, I'm giving them the tools to fight back." The crowd erupted. This wasn't a debate anymore, this was a movement, and Zuckerberg had just realized he wasn't the leader of it. Jungkook turned to the audience. "You've heard what Mark thinks," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. "Now I want to hear from you." The crowd leaned forward, breath held. "If you believe the future should belong to creators, not corporations, if you believe AI should help people, not replace them, drop a 10 in the comments. Right now." The live stream chat detonated. Phones across the room lit up. Hashtag Jungkook owns the future started trending. Tens poured in by the second. Zuckerberg sat silent, because at that moment it wasn't his future anymore. It was Jungkook's. The energy was electric. People weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. Zuckerberg tried to recover, forcing a dry chuckle. He leaned back, legs crossed, voice low and calculating. "That's a nice story, Jungkook," he said. "Really, it is. But let's talk about something real. Let's talk about history." Jungkook tilted his head slightly, waiting. "You see," Zuckerberg continued, gesturing to the audience, "people love an underdog, one artist standing against the machine. But that's just storytelling. It's romantic, but it's also delusional." The crowd hushed. "History doesn't favor nostalgia," he pressed. "It favors efficiency. It favors the ones who adapt. People didn't stick with DVDs, they streamed. They didn't stick with gas, they went electric. They won't stick with actors either." He leaned forward, pressing harder. "They'll adapt to AI-generated movies, AI-generated music. Not because it's better, because it's easier, cheaper, faster." There it was. Clean hit. Some audience members shifted. Arms folded. Doubt crept in. Zuckerberg smirked. He had found the crack. Now he was going to break it wide open. "Let me ask you something, Jungkook," Zuckerberg said, his voice laced with the confidence of a man who had dominated too many stages to count. "You've spent your career playing icons, being adored, standing as a symbol of something larger than life. But this isn't a world tour. This is reality. And in reality," he leaned in with a cold smirk, "the machine always wins." The room went dead quiet. Cameras zoomed in, and for a moment Jungkook just sat there, still unreadable until he smiled. Not a grin, not for show, but the kind of slow, assured, fearless smile that cracked through tension like sunlight through storm clouds. Zuckerberg blinked. Jungkook leaned forward, his voice soft and calm, almost amused. "You know, Mark," he said, "I think you just proved my point." Zuckerberg frowned slightly, confused. Jungkook didn't flinch. "You keep praising the machine, the efficiency, the inevitability of it all. So let me ask you this," he paused. "If AI is so superior, if the future belongs to it completely, why am I sitting across from you and not a machine?" The audience gasped. Zuckerberg stiffened. Jungkook went on, his tone razor-sharp. "You had every resource to put a machine in this chair. A perfect algorithm, an unbeatable chatbot. But you didn't. You chose to be here, a real human, having a real conversation. In real time." The crowd exploded. Zuckerberg's smirk faltered. Jungkook shrugged lightly. "Because deep down, even people don't connect with machines. They connect with people." Zuckerberg's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jungkook's words had landed like a final verse in a song that hit too close to the truth. Every camera in the room caught the billionaire's tight jaw, the subtle twitch in his hand as he tried to stay composed. He had spent years debating the future, shaping the narrative. But now Jungkook had flipped it and done it without a script. Zuckerberg tried to laugh it off, waved his hand. "All right," he said, his voice regaining some edge. "You made your point, but let's not pretend you're a visionary. You're not an engineer, Jungkook. You're not a scientist. You're a pop star." The room stilled. Zuckerberg leaned in, his tone sharpening. "So tell me, what gives you the right to speak about AI? What qualifies you to challenge me?" The tension crackled. Jungkook didn't move. Then, calmly, almost gently, he exhaled and looked Zuckerberg in the eye. "Mark," he said, "I don't need to be an engineer to understand the future." A pause. "I just need to be human." The audience erupted. Phones lit up. The chat exploded. Zuckerberg's composure cracked. He had lost the room and he knew it. Clips were already flooding social media. The headlines were writing themselves. The tech king had been humbled, live, by a man who hadn't built circuits but had touched millions. And still Zuckerberg wasn't done. He took a slow breath, leaned back, steepled his fingers. "That was a nice speech," he said, smirking again, though his eyes didn't match. "You made them feel something. I'll give you that. But let's not forget, people don't just connect with each other. They connect with whatever makes life easier." He paused, letting the words land. "And in the end, that's what AI is going to do." Zuckerberg leaned back, hands folded, his gaze sharp and voice steady. "Convenience, efficiency, progress," he said slowly. "That's what people will always choose. Not because AI is evil, Jungkook, but because that's just how people are." His words were measured, predatory, and they hit. You could feel it in the air, the flicker of doubt passing over a few faces in the crowd. Not doubt in Jungkook, but in themselves. Zuckerberg saw it and pressed in. Sure, tonight people feel inspired. You stirred something real. But what about tomorrow? What about when they go home and an AI-generated movie is just there? Faster, cheaper, just as exciting. What happens when they get used to it? He leaned forward, confidence returning like a tide. You think they'll still care about meaning when they can't even tell the difference? Silence. And in that pause, Zuckerberg saw it, the hesitation, the uncertainty. It was small, but it was his opening. Here's the truth, he said, his voice a whisper that somehow filled the room. People don't resist change forever. They adapt. They move on. Even from you. Boom. The words hit like a stone dropped in still water. The auditorium didn't cheer. They didn't boo either. They sat with it. The discomfort was real, because Zuckerberg had just pulled the curtain back on a quiet fear. That maybe, just maybe, he was right. That one day no one would care. That the world would keep spinning, and meaning would become a luxury people no longer afforded. And for the first time, the power shifted just a little back to Zuckerberg. He leaned into it, savoring the moment. In 100 years, he said, with that cold edge returning to his voice, no one's going to remember this debate. They won't remember this night. And they certainly won't remember. He gestured casually at Jungkook. You. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was a low blow, and Zuckerberg meant every word. Because this wasn't just an attack, it was erasure. If he could convince the world that Jungkook didn't matter in the long run, then none of tonight's impact would stick. He leaned back with a smirk. And if you think I'm wrong, he added, eyebrow raised, ask yourself this. Who remembers the last person who tried to stop progress? The room was quiet again, more than ever. The audience didn't know what to believe anymore, and Zuckerberg was banking on it. The cameras turned to Jungkook. Everyone waited, but instead of firing back, he laughed. Not a defensive laugh, not a forced one. A real, full-bodied, grounded laugh that rang through the room like a bell. Zuckerberg's smirk twitched. Something funny? He asked. Jungkook wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, still smiling. Yeah, he said, because you just made the same mistake every unstoppable man in history has made. Zuckerberg's eyes narrowed. And what's that? Jungkook's smile didn't fade. You think you're the future, he said. The audience held their breath. But you're just the past. Boom. Zuckerberg froze. Jungkook leaned in, eyes calm, steady. You think people will forget me? He said, voice warm but unshakable. Sorry, Mark, people don't remember history because of the machines that were built. They remember it because of the people who stood against them. The room exploded. Zuckerberg's fingers curled against the table. Jungkook wasn't debating anymore. He was closing. The people who changed the world, he continued, weren't the ones who built the machines. They were the ones who refused to be controlled by them. Applause surged like a wave. You want to know why people won't forget me? Jungkook asked, turning to the audience. It's because people never forget the ones who remind them they have a choice. The crowd stood. Phones were in the air. Live stream chats flooded with fire emojis, hearts, tens, screaming caps-locked messages. Zuckerberg sat still. His face had lost its composure entirely. The cameras caught every second of it. Jungkook turned, soaking in the moment not for vanity, but for victory. So let me ask you, he said, sweeping his eyes across the auditorium. Do you want a future built by people who say you don't have a choice? A thunderous "no" shook the rafters. Jungkook smiled. Or do you want to be the ones who decide what's next? The crowd lost it. Applause. Cheers. A chant beginning to form. Zuckerberg didn't speak. He couldn't. Because in that moment it wasn't his future anymore. It was Jungkook's. Jungkook had won. The energy in the auditorium was unstoppable, electric, and alive. The audience was on its feet, chanting, cheering, fully behind him now. This debate wasn't just about artificial intelligence anymore. It had evolved into a symbol of something far bigger, a clash between control and freedom, between the cold inevitability of technology and the raw, beating heart of human will. And in front of millions watching live, Jungkook had just defeated one of the most powerful men in the world. Mark Zuckerberg sat motionless. His usual smirk was gone. He wasn't debating anymore, he was surviving. His fingers gripped the table. His eyes darted slightly, as if searching for something, anything, to salvage the moment. But there was nothing left, because Jungkook had done something no one expected. He hadn't just won the argument, he had changed the conversation forever. Jungkook turned toward the crowd, still standing, still roaring his name, and slowly raised a hand. The noise settled, but the energy didn't fade. It thrummed in the air like a live wire. Every single person in that room was holding their breath, waiting for what he would say next. And when he finally spoke, his voice was clear, steady, and filled with quiet certainty. "This isn't just about AI," he said, scanning the audience, locking eyes with them, making each person feel like he was speaking directly to them. "This is about who gets to decide the future." He gestured subtly toward Zuckerberg. "There are people out there, powerful people, who want you to believe that you don't have a choice, that progress is inevitable, that the world will change with or without you." He shook his head. "But that's a lie." The crowd erupted again, roars of agreement shaking the walls. Jungkook leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just enough to pull the entire room closer. "The truth is," he continued, "the future isn't built by machines. It's built by the people who refuse to be left behind." A hush fell over the audience, not from shock, but from raw focus. They were locked in. He had them. "This isn't just my fight," Jungkook said. "It's our fight. It's about making sure the future belongs to us, not just a handful of billionaires who think they get to decide for everyone else." He took a breath. Then, with a small, knowing smile, "AI doesn't have power. We do." The audience exploded, louder than ever before. Zuckerberg sat frozen, his face unreadable. He had lost badly. Jungkook turned back to the crowd and raised a hand again, bringing the energy to a perfect, intentional pause. "Now I need to ask you something," he said, scanning the sea of faces in front of him. "If you believe in the power of human creativity, if you believe that the future should be decided by people, not machines, then let the world hear you right now." His voice rose, sharp, powerful, undeniable. "Drop a yes in the comments right now. Let them know we're still here." The live stream chat exploded. Yes, yes, yes. Thousands, then millions, flooding the screen. Jungkook grinned. He wasn't just speaking anymore. He was leading. "Because this isn't the end," he said, his voice rising again, filled with momentum. "This is just the beginning." And then, eyes locked on the camera, he pointed directly at the screen. "If you're ready to fight for a future where creativity still matters, where people still matter, then hit that subscribe button, right now." The crowd lost it. Phones shot up in the air. Subscriptions flew in real time. The numbers skyrocketed on the live feed. And Zuckerberg? He didn't say a word, because in that moment it wasn't his future anymore. It was Jungkook's. The screen faded to black, and in bold white letters, one final message appeared. "The future belongs to those who choose it. Subscribe now."